Welcome back to Formula One Espresso News. I'm going to be unpacking Silverstone. I'm also going to be unpacking all the latest from the paddock with, of course, Will Buxton's explosive tweet sending absolutely everybody into meltdown. So you're going to get the latest up-to-date news of just what is going on. Now, if all of that takes your fancy and you haven't already, quick reminder from me, there is a like, follow, subscribe button so you can be kept up to date with all of the latest actual news that's going on in the world of Formula One. I'm Terry. This is Coffee Corner Motorsport. Grab your coffee, sit down, strap in, and let's give it some full beans. So let's have a look back at Silverstone, because those will know a few weeks ago I said I had no intention of going to the British Grand Prix. I'd spent my budget on going to Monaco, something I don't regret, and I was planning on covering it remotely from my shed. Now, the reality is that changed very quickly. Mark from the Pop-Up Hotel reached out and said, did I fancy spending a couple of days there to see what they'd done with the place? Now, if you've been following Coffee Corner Motorsport, you know that we've been partnering with Pop-Up Hotel since the very beginning. We were there when they were just a stand with an idea that they had to bring this proposition to Silverstone. We went back last year to see what happened, and obviously this is now the second year, technically the third year, that they've been at Silverstone. So it was great to go back and actually see what they've done, talk to Mark, talk to some of the people who were there as part of the activations. There is an article coming out on the website for that one, so absolutely shameless plug. Feel free to check that one out. But Mark obviously invited me down for Thursday, Friday. It turned out to be a really great experience because on Thursday, which was of course media day, it allowed me to enjoy some hospitality, take my laptop, type away, and then of course I went back on Friday with Dad to watch some on-track action, and then that enabled me to get back into the shed and catch up with all of the latest from the world of Formula One, because whilst it's great being trackside, it's also great being here with all of these TV screens, all of this stuff going on, so that I can actually get content out there, get articles out there, and see what's going on. Something you can't actually do from a track, which I've been really annoyed about. I always say there's a very different atmosphere being trackside to what there is being at home. The advantage is you get a great atmosphere, you're caught up in emotion, you get to speak to people, you get to meet like-minded people, you get to mix, and it's amazing. But then also, I miss having timing screens, sector screens, and knowing what's going on in terms of the commentary and TV feed. So it's the best of both worlds. This was, I found it was a really good balance to get it for that. And with F2, F1 Academy, obviously there, I cover those well on the website. So if you haven't already, check that one out. It's coffeecornermotorsport.com. And of course, there was IndyCar going on as well. So lots and lots to get on. But anyway, let's go on to the news. So Charles Leclerc, first win since 2024. First ever win at Silverstone. George Russell, P2. At one point, that was looking doubtful. He was fighting for that P3 place. And then, of course, he got that puncher. That looked like his continuing theme of not being on the podium at Silverstone was about to continue. And then Lewis Hamilton in P3 with that final podium slot. Now, I've got a lot of flack on social media for my post about Lewis Hamilton, and I'm not going to backtrack on it. I still feel Lewis Hamilton should have got a penalty. And I'm going to explain that. And the reason for that is Lewis Hamilton went to see the stewards for a infringement with the yellow flag. Now, there are some circumstances in there, and I want to just explain my reason behind it a little bit more, because a video is very quick. A podcast allows me to go into it a little bit deeper. Now, what happened was Lewis Hamilton passed the first flag panel that was, of course, it was a green flag panel. It wasn't yellow, it was green. However, on his dashboard, we then saw the yellow lights light up as he was going flat out. Now, at that point, there was no light panel for him to pass. So the only sort of warning he's got is visibly on his dashboard. Now, he said himself that he went through this flat out. He didn't lift, and he didn't notice even the light panel or even what's on his dashboard. The steward said that it was guilty, but a reprimand. So what they're saying is, yes, we agree it was guilty. You went through it flat out. You didn't lift like you should have, but it's still giving you a reprimand because you did something wrong. Now, for me, this is where I disagree, because almost always, when it comes to health and safety in Formula One, the FIA clamped down on it because it's health and safety. They've always shown a zero-tolerance approach to it because it sends the wrong message to anybody else. And what I mean by that, if you look at the steward's document that came out after Lewis Hamilton's decision, it talks about his fight with Max Verstappen. It talks about him looking at the mirrors. It talks about them being in close proximity. The reality now is you've now set a precedent for other people to use that as an excuse. Now, what I mean by that is if you're a driver and you're in a close battle and you happen to not lift through a yellow flag, you can now say, well, I just didn't see the yellow flag because I was concentrating on the car behind. Now, normally the FIA would have gone, well, tough, it's health and safety. What you've now got is you've got a precedent set by the FIA that says that's a mitigating circumstance. So what you've done, you've taken something that was very black and white and you've now made it grey. The very thing that we hate, you've now made it a grey area by adding this interpretation in. what the sensible thing would have been done would be to acknowledge that there was circumstances, but to still give him the penalty, because a bit like Kimi Antonelli with track limits, it's still a penalty. Now, going to Kimi Antonelli, he obviously finished all the way in P12 after that 5-second time penalty. He was on course for the win, let's be honest about it. However, he had that problem. He ran over the curb. It broke that windshield on the front and caused major damage. And he then got a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and supposedly gaining the advantage. Now, the reality is it's a track limit penalty, and it's the right penalty to give. And that's my point here. The bit with Kimi is spot on. He left the track multiple times, therefore you get a time penalty. It should have been the same with Lewis. Now, what I don't agree with is, because we had this after the race, the stewards who made that decision about Lewis knew exactly the impact of what a 5-second penalty would do. Now, I'm not saying that clouded their judgment. What I'm saying is it leaves them open to the interpretation. They kept him on the podium because it was a British Grand Prix, and they knew that a 5-second penalty would drop him not just off the podium, but completely out the points. Now, it's hard to prove either way, but it's hard to argue either way. So me as a fan who likes very black and white, those who follow me will know that, I can't sit there and argue on social media that that didn't happen, because it's hard to say, because there is no way of knowing that. The reality is it should have been a penalty, and that's my point. Now, the safety car is a little bit different. Now, the safety car was followed to the letter of the law. Now, that may not have been what we all wanted to see. It may not have been the last lap shootout we wanted. But the reality is what happened with the safety car and Kimi Antonelli was as per the regulations. The safety car rules are quite simple. They were changed after 2021, which is you signal for all of the lap cars to go past. Once all the lap cars have gone past, you then tell the safety car that it's coming in, and it comes in on the following lap. It's got to do a full lap before it comes in. That means it was not able to come in until lap 52, which was, of course, the final lap of the Grand Prix. The error was seen on our timing screens and on our screens at home that the safety car was coming in. It was never coming in as per the regulations, and that's the bit where I think they dropped a hang on that. Now, they're saying that it was an error. What I will say is the FIA are having a lot of errors this season, whichever way you look at it. We've got the issues with the Monaco timing that's obviously still going on with obviously Red Bull and McLaren taking the FIA to court over that one. And we're now seeing this as well. If this is a genuine case of it's a system error, there's a lot of system errors that Formula One management and the FIA need to get on top of, because it's damaging the sport and the reputation. But the reality of the situation is very simple. Kimi Antonelli's penalty was right. The safety car finish was right. Lewis Hamilton, I don't agree with. I think she should have got a time penalty. Now, obviously, Lando in P4 will be absolutely delighted with that one. Isaac Hadjar in P5, Liam Lawson and Arvin Lindblad, the two racing bulls, they are having an absolutely stellar season. And I know that obviously there's talk of Liam Lawson being replaced, but the reality is he's doing enough to keep that pace at the moment. He's driving really well. Audi with their best finish in Formula One with Gabriel Bortoletto in P8, Franco Colapinto and Pierre Gasly, the other two Alpines, P9, P10. Oscar Piastri, the subject of much speculation today, in P11, will of course be disappointed with that one. But the reality of all of this is what's happening at Silverstone is we wanted a last lap shootout and we didn't get it. But for me, it was an exciting race. There was a lot of talk about the yo-yoing effect with, of course, the cars and the engine management. We always knew that was going to be an issue at Silverstone. It's a long track. It's got those long straights. We knew that was going to happen. We knew that they were going to have to harvest, that we know that corners that were traditionally flat out were no longer flat out. And we had that, and I get that. But the reality is that's what we've got, and we can't change what we've got in terms of the regulations and the rules and everything else. But I thought the actual racing itself was quite good. I think the weather helped at Silverstone, obviously a record attendance, and which the organisers will no doubt be happy about. I was really, really stoked to see that we've got F2 on there. We've got F1 Academy on there as well, support series on there. Silverstone should be doing that. It's a way to activate to a set of fans who are condensed into the track. And what I mean by that is, when you go to a Las Vegas, a Miami, you've got events going on all over the city and you haven't got a captive audience. With Silverstone, because it's a traditional circuit, you've got a captive audience, because once they're through the gates, realistically, they're staying in those gates. And the only way to captivate those is to have a lot of off-track activations, which is what Silverstone had, obviously, and then obviously to bring other series into the mix as well, which exposes them to an audience that may not have experienced them before and hopefully allows them to grow. So I'm hoping that the likes of Spa, the likes of Monza, all of the other tracks which may be looking at a blueprint of what to do, will look at what Silverstone had done and say, actually, by bringing in the support series, by opening up to F2, I know they do that anyway, F3, and obviously F1 Academy, we can gauge and we can promote a sport which may not have got the exposure, but suddenly gets that captive audience. The only thing I will say is they need to look at timings. So F1 Academy, for example, hospitality in places with shut-in, and then F1 Academy was on track. I heard they stayed open, but again, it was a bit of a mismatch. And also, when they were qualifying dead early in the morning, it looked like a lot of empty seats because people hadn't hit the track. So maybe there's something to be done around the timing of some of the support series as well that will make them actually grow in the sense of it's at a time where people can tune in and watch it, which the organisers need to look at. But as a whole, I thought Silverstone went well. Yes, the prices are high, but if you've got a sellout crowd, expect those prices to rise again next year. The reality is Silverstone is selling out, and whilst it's selling out, those prices are only going to go one way. And while we talk about that, let's talk about influencers, activations, and some of the other bits that are going on, because we saw a lot of posts about people talking about people being invited to Formula One for the first time who maybe are not traditional fans and should they have been there. You got to understand there's a market here, and you can't blame the brands for activating it by inviting influencers. Now, influencers are really integral part of modern day motorsport media. Now, the reality is, if you invite an influencer with a big reach, they can get to an audience which may not be a motorsport audience because that's not their normal content. So whilst one side of the fan base is almost hating on that, saying that's wrong, the brands love it because they're exposing their brand and also Formula One to an audience that may not be in the world of Formula One, who suddenly go, what is Formula One? And I'm going to look at it. And also, when a brand activates, they want to promote that brand. So, for example, F1 Academy had Weller there. They were sponsoring not only the wildcard driver, but they also had a car there. So naturally, they were inviting influencers. Now, yes, you can argue there should be a crossover. Yes, you can argue, could Weller have done better to find motorsport creators who could have sold their messaging a lot better? But the reality is, when you've got a social media reach that some of these influencers have, it costs a lot of money to run a advertising campaign to reach the same audience than what it does to invite an influencer to that event. And an influencer ticket isn't taken away from a normal general grandstand ticket. There aren't many influencers who are being invited in on a general admission or a grandstand ticket. They are coming into a hospitality area because that brand has brought a load of tickets. So whilst I get the sentiment that it could be done differently and some people don't like it, I also can totally see from a business point of view why it's done. And also I feel it's a bit harsh to say they're bringing away from a normal fan who may be wanting to buy a ticket, because I don't think they're the same market, if I'm honest. Yes, there'd be a crossover, don't get me wrong, but I also think the reality is that an influencer in a paddock club is not the same market as a fan who wants to buy a grandstand ticket, and I think we can muddy the waters that way. But for me, it's commonplace, it's going to happen. I think there's a element of, if you don't like it, just kind of scroll on, because it's going to happen and brands are going to keep doing it. And from Formula One's point of view, it opens them up to new markets, potentially new brands come into the sport, which obviously makes them more commercially viable, which is what Formula One want to do. It is basic business marketing. In the old days, I'm saying that like I'm really old now, but in the old days, you put an advert on the TV. Now you put an advert on Instagram. And reality is, a paid advert that is an ad on the social media isn't as popular or gets as much reach as when an influencer posts it from a day out. So that's the reality of the situation. So I think whilst we shouldn't hate on them, a lot of these influencers are doing it as a job, and that's what they do. That's the reality of it. That's no different to anybody else going to work. So it's one of those where I just think we've got to accept that in the world of modern Formula One, a bit like we've accepted that Drive to Survive is a part of Formula One, this is a part of modern day Formula One, and you can either adapt with it or you can just choose to ignore it. It doesn't really affect how I watch the sport, and it doesn't really affect what I do. So I'm kind of that mindset, but really intrigued to know your thoughts on that one. But I do agree with the comments where maybe the brands could do a little bit better in making sure they're reaching a mix almost. So it's almost like not just do one side of it. Can they make a motorsport link as well with motorsport creators? Because there are a lot of great creators who deserve an opportunity as well. And I'm really conscious of that. But anyway, let's get back to Silverstone. And there's some disasters in there, isn't there? There's some big losers, Max Verstappen and Red Bull. We're going to come on to that one later on. Alex Albon and Williams are having an absolute nightmare. At what point does the question start being asked about James Vowles? And what I mean by that is James Vowles was very open, very elegant. I love listening to James Vowles. I'm a big fan. But ultimately, Williams have fallen well short of what they promised in 2026. And at some point, the vultures are going to start circling. Carlos Sainz technically won the race because he got that penalty lap, basically, and lapped himself when he shouldn't have, which put himself in the lead. And when he came over the line, I think he was technically in the lead. Obviously got that lap taken away, got a penalty lap applied, and was dropped down to P17. Aston Martin bringing the rear with P18 and P19, a lap down. Cadillac will be absolutely delighted to get Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas to the finish line. And I think Haas are having a really troublesome season. A lot was expected of Haas with that Ferrari engine. And looking at where they were, P12, P13, it kind of summed up their weekend. It was a situation where they haven't really made a step on this season, and they need to. We know there's a lot of speculation around Esteban Ocon and his future. We know that Ferrari are looking to continue in that push to get a Ferrari driver academy in there with obviously Kamara, and we also know that Toyota are looking to get a Japanese-backed driver in there. Yuki Tsunoda's being muted as well. So a lot of politics going on behind the scenes at Haas, which is really worth keeping an eye on. I don't think there's any danger to Ollie Behrman, so I think that Esteban Ocon is a question mark here, and I don't think they would go with 2 Ferrari driver academies, which obviously Ollie Behrman technically is. I think that they would bring in probably a Japanese driver to suit the Toyota deal, who's obviously gaining more and more influence as they build that infrastructure within the Haas team. But Williams, Carlos Sainz is being very open about his troubles with the car. Aston Martin, we've heard from Adrian Newey just last week, promising a big upgrade for Hungary. The new engine is due in Zandvoort, so Honda is saying it's going to be Zandvoort for the new engine. They are playing it down. Pedro de la Rosa said last week he's trying to play down the Hungary package. A lot of people, I think, got really excited straight away. But you'd have to say with their season, it's just been nothing but disappointing. And it's just another season where actually you kind of think, what next for, obviously, Fernando Alonso in the future in Formula One. He's been very open about he's unsure what to do. He's going to use the summer before making a decision. So that's pretty much my roundup of Silverstone. So let me know your thoughts on Silverstone. Who are your winners? Who are your losers? Kimi Antonelli, I think, is a big loser. George Russell felt like he's a big winner from it, finally breaking that podium duck, as I said. And Lewis Hamilton, obviously keeping that P3, I feel, would be a big winner. And Isaac Hadjar in P5, we haven't talked about him, a lot closer to Max Verstappen, continuing that rich rudder form. Forgot my words then. So yeah, he's probably another big winner for that one. And the Racing Bulls are definitely big winners for me. But in terms of the losers, you'd have to say you got your Williams, your Aston Martins, Kimi Antonelli, as I said, and then of course Nico Hulkenberg was unlucky with his DNF because Audi actually look like they've got a really competitive car. But let me know your thoughts and quick swig of a drink, and let's get on to some news.
These are my Abu Dhabi notes from one of the most controversial races Formula One has ever seen. I've been commentating for a long time now, and I've always written out my notes. So I do a track map for every single race, and on it will be the gears and the minimum cornering speed for each corner. This is just general trivia about each team and each driver. But these are my labours of love. These are what I produce for each and every single race.
Okay, so we've got to talk about Will Buxton's tweet that came out yesterday. So Will Buxton tweeted yesterday, the whole of the world went mad, everyone jumped to the wrong conclusion, and suddenly we found ourselves refreshing screens, or some of us did, refreshing screens for a breaking news announcement that, to be honest, was never going to come. And what I mean by that is, Will Buxton's employed by IndyCar. It was always going to be an IndyCar news announcement. In the world of IndyCar, this is a big money move. It is monumental, don't get me wrong. If you follow Coffee Corner Motorsport, you would have seen on the IndyCar race report yesterday that I put in the Coffee Corner take that this move was about to be announced. And lo and behold, it is. So McLaren have made massive moves in that. And for IndyCar, that is a big move. Now, obviously, what happened is we saw a lot of engagement farming, which is my pet hate. And what I mean by that is we saw a lot of people jump on the bandwagon who didn't have any knowledge of anything, were jumping on it, saying how he's used a tweet like for Lewis, and that's going to be a big announcement in Formula One. And what we're now seeing is this big backtrack from these same creators and outlets because they did this engagement farming, who are looking a little bit silly because there is no big announcement. Now, the world of Formula One works very weirdly. Sometimes you can get a big announcement, and they might get lucky. There might be a big announcement. But as of recording this podcast, there is no major announcement in the world of Formula One. Monza is having 3 successive years of sprint races, and there is most likely the option to bring Bahrain back to the Formula One calendar, which will be announced around the summer break time. It's looking like between sort of Baku and Singapore as an option to bring Bahrain back on the calendar, which Formula One are really keen to do because they lost an absolute shed load of money by not racing in Saudi Arabia and obviously Bahrain, and they want to do that. And then, of course, they want to finish the season off in Qatar and Abu Dhabi as well. These are big money events for Formula One, and they need to make sure that everyone knows it's safe and okay to go to the Middle East. Whether it is or not is your own personal opinion, but Formula One want to send that very positive message out that says it's safe and we're still racing there. The big issue around these events currently is insurance. So what I mean by that is the teams and fans and event hosts are struggling to get people to insure them at the moment for these events. And with no insurance, you can't hold an event. The team will never send their drivers, their equipment, the personnel there if you can't get insurance, and that's where the issue is at the moment. So once that's resolved, we'll be back racing in the Middle East. I've got absolutely no doubt about it. But the reality is, at the moment, it's still a question mark over even things like Baku and obviously the back end of the season, but it remains to be seen. But in terms of big news, there isn't a lot going on. Now, the other couple of stories that are floating around, Max Verstappen leaving Red Bull. So Max Verstappen can no longer finish P2 at the moment by the summer break. So therefore, his exit clause in his Red Bull contract is now permanently active. So he is now in a situation where he can activate that clause in his contract and leave Red Bull. Now, that doesn't mean that Max is going to leave Red Bull. What it means is his management team are going to be actively exploring what options are available to Max Verstappen for 2027 and onwards. Now, that could be a variety of things. That could be to say Red Bull, if he feels that they're making the right steps and this is just a blip they're going through. However, judging by the current performance of the car and how Max is talking on the radio and in interviews, I'd say they've got a lot of work to do for that one. And of course, that could explore another Formula One team, although options do look limited. We're going to come on to McLaren in a minute, or even retiring from the sport and doing something else, which Max has been quite open about. For me personally, I feel that Max isn't decided. I think Max is very deliberately weighing up his options through his management team, who are exploring all of the options to give Max the choice of what he wants to do. So I don't think we're due any imminent news on Max Verstappen and what happens with him. Now, going back to, obviously, McLaren, one of the situation is that he was muted about is going to McLaren. I'm not too sure I see this as a move, not because I don't feel that Zach Brown would want Max Verstappen. Any team principal, as I've talked about, would want Max Verstappen in their team. But the politics and the dynamics don't feel right. Yes, GP is going there. However, I don't see Lando being happy with Max Verstappen coming in. I don't feel that Max's camp would be very happy about him sharing a team with Lando and then potentially not having that overriding number one status that he currently enjoys at Red Bull. And currently, Oscar Piastri isn't set to go anywhere else at the moment, according to both McLaren and Oscar's camp themselves. So again, where would Oscar go to make room for that move? He could do a swap with Max, of course, and could go to Red Bull. So what I will say is, never say never. As I've said many a time, this is Formula One. I would say there isn't currently any substantial evidence pointing towards that happening is probably the best way to describe it. So as it stands, I think Max is weighing up his options, and I think that Oscar is probably annoyed with where McLaren currently are. No one from McLaren is going to be happy with their current performance. They are the defending champions, and they haven't got to grips with the car whatsoever, and they haven't made improvements like they thought they would do either. So they're going to need a big uptake for the second half of the season to convince their drivers that yeah, they're on the right path. But ultimately, this is the disadvantage for both Oscar and Lando for having long-term contracts. They're kind of tied into it. And where do they go? We know Charles Leclerc signed on for, obviously, Ferrari for a long-term deal. We know that Lewis Hamilton is going to be racing next year. We all knew that. I think Fred Vasseur kind of alluded to it was now activated. It was always Lewis's to activate. He was always going to do it if the car was competitive. Currently sitting P3 in the championship. Of course, he's going to activate it. So I think for me, the reality is where would Max go? And if he's not going to McLaren, not going to Ferrari, not going to Mercedes, it looks like, because they're happy with their partnership, the only sort of move that makes sense for him money-wise would be someone like Aston Martin, who are treading around at the back of the grids and no one knows if Adrian's going to be able to fix that car. So that, to me, would be a massive gamble for Max to do that, leaving the current situation of Red Bull and where they are at the moment to go to Aston Martin, not knowing if they can pull it round. So I think that it's still going to take one driver to set off the bottleneck of driver moves. I feel that Carlos Sainz will have one eye on the exit if he can engineer a move that's better for him. There's talk of Audi potentially looking again for Carlos Sainz. I think that's a fit that would work for both parties if they wanted to. However, I also feel that Hülkenberg and Bortoletti especially have done enough to keep their seats as well. And I think that Audi are happy with him. So again, I'm not too sure where this moves, but I feel that one driver move is going to knock all this off. But I feel that the top seats are starting to close very rapidly with news of what Charles is doing. Mercedes wanted to carry on with their partnership and all of the other bits. But let me know your thoughts on that one. But that's the kind of the latest news to where we're currently at in the world of Formula One. Additional development to upgrade opportunities, ADUO. The situation we're in now is Red Bull have met with the FIA. They've been told that by the calculations the FIA use, Red Bull have the most powerful engines, so they're no longer be able to have an upgrade. Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, and of course Audi, they've got the upgrades. So the FIA have said that whilst they agree with some of the stuff that Red Bull are saying, the criteria they use is quite open, and that's the criteria that they've used. And they've met with Red Bull, they've talked to Red Bull about how they made their decision, and that they ain't changed their mind, basically. So we're expecting an official communication either before Belgium or just after to explain all of this and exactly what team gets what upgrade opportunity going forward, because the teams will have them. But Mercedes with an upgrade opportunity on their engine is quite a worrying thought. However, with their current reliability, what I will say is that Mercedes is fast, but their reliability this season is going to be something they're going to really want to look at, because that's cost them a lot of points going into heading into the summer break, and it's probably cost them a big lead in the championship. And the reality is, as teams are learning the regulations, we're seeing this conversion. We're seeing that Mercedes has been pegged back with a couple of regulation tweaks. So that bit around the diffuser area, which I did a video on, where they've tweaked that as well. Of course, we've seen about the engine settings at the start of the season as well that came into effect since Monaco. I don't think that's had an impact, like I said, but I also think that reality is that Mercedes' advantage they had at the start of the season has been each way. But equally, there are some other advantages like the Ferrari starts that I think have also been each way as well. So I do think there's a bit of levelling going on. But Ferrari looks strong coming back. They look like they've now got a package that can challenge over a few tracks. And they look like they've made steps in the engine side of it as well with their first upgrade that they obviously brought to Austria. We know that Audi have made an improvement with their engine. They actually brought theirs to Barcelona. We've not seen an improvement in the Mercedes engine whatsoever at the moment, so that's kind of a question mark. And we've not really seen a Honda one as such, so it's hard to tell what's happening with that one. But for me, engine development is kind of one of those where I think they'd be pushing for AGO to be scrapped eventually, because I think that the way they measure it isn't the best way of measuring it, and it doesn't feel like it's benefiting the team that it needs to benefit from when you see lots of Mercedes getting an engine upgrade and extra budget potentially to take that car even further. So I want to see where this pans out at the end of the season, and I want to see what happens with the FIA and the teams going forward. But I don't think that's going to be something going forward. But that's pretty much what I've got. Christian Horner. Almost forgot about Christian Horner. How can I forget about Christian Horner? So Christian Horner is obviously back in the paddock at the British Grand Prix, not missed a Silverstone race in 20-odd years. Obviously got a new book coming out, attended with his PA. The reality is I feel that Christian hasn't got a destination at the moment in Formula One. I feel he hasn't got a deal that suits him. It feels like he's got a lot of options where he could come back, but it feels like he's taken the Gunter Steiner book tour option at the moment, which will raise a lot of money. And Gunter's done tremendously well out of his book tour and his book signing and his audio book and all the other things that are about to follow from Christian Horner. I think Red Bull and probably Max's camp might be a little bit nervous over what's in Christian's book, and especially now that he's free from all of his Red Bull contractual duties, which means he can pretty much write and say what he wants. And there will, of course, be some NDAs in there from that settlement that he got from Red Bull. But the reality is he's now a free agent. I think realistically, Aston Martin looking at Christian Horner is an option. I've said this before. If you're Aston Martin, you need someone who can provide a winning combination for this team of superstars they've got, which can't gel. And Christian Horner does that. I also feel that the issue you've now got with Christian Horner is the off-track stuff that follows with appointing someone like Christian. If you look at our on-track success, then there's no doubt someone like Christian should be back in the paddock. But if you're looking from that commercial brand damaging, what it means to your business going forward and what those text messages did to Christian Horner as a brand, you've also got to take that into account. So I think that's where the question marks coming over a lot of these deals at the moment. And I will say that he's probably trying to do a good job in correcting some of that, rightly or wrongly. That's just the world we live in politics, not my personal view. But I also feel that what we're now going to see is this consented effort of Christian where he's going to use the book tour to publish what he wants to do next step. So we've already seen the interviews are starting. We're going to see a lot more of this, sitting down, giving access to the media now that he's no longer confined by that Red Bull agreement. And if you're not a Christian Horner fan, I probably want to apologise in advance, because I feel you're going to be seeing a lot more of him on your TV screens and on your news sites, giving interviews with a new book and him trying to push that. So my thoughts on it, no destination at the moment for Christian, but he's looking for somewhere and he's going to use the book tour in the meantime to push that from that point of view. But yeah, that's all I've got for you this week. And a massive thank you, as always, for tuning into the podcast. I've tried to keep it as close and to 30 minutes as I can. As always, thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for supporting coffeecornermotorsport.com. Head on over there for all of the latest. You'll get all of the latest from the world of Formula 1, Formula 2, IndyCar, F1 Academy, MotoGP's on there as well. So if you like a variety of content, head on over to coffeecornermotorsport.com. As always, there is the option to subscribe to the podcast whatever platform you're listening to this on. Hit that subscribe, like, or follow button. And we have got Buy Me a Coffee. Now, Buy Me a Coffee is a very simple process, and I've talked about this quite a lot. I don't believe in putting Coffee Corner Motorsport behind a paywall. So what I'm looking for is people to donate the cost of a coffee every month, so £5 a month, to Coffee Corner Motorsport. What that does, that covers production costs, goes back into Coffee Corner Motorsport, and what it enables me to do is keep Coffee Corner Motorsport free and away from major ads being run all over the articles. There will be adverts because, like anything, we got to try and make ends meet. But the idea behind it is there is nothing exclusive. You just know that you're supporting an independent motorsport and media brand that's basically been built out of this shed, which I'm really proud of, and I really love the support you all give me. So thank you for listening. I'm Terry. This is Coffee Corner Motorsport. You've been listening to Formula One Espresso News, and I will catch you on the next show.